Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie and today's video is going to be a November reading wrap up. Before I get into the video, there is a link in the description box to a GoFundMe to support Ala and her family whilst they're stuck in Gaza. If you could check that out, that would be great. So November was kind of a strange reading month, I think, really, ultimately, but I did read quite a few things. I did quite a lot of audiobook reading, actually, as well as some, like, physical reading. The first thing I read was A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and this is, like, a vampire book. It came out a few years ago. It was, like, originally self-published, and then it was, like, so popular it was picked up and traditionally published. And I believe S.T. Gibson, like, writes quite a few things now that are traditionally published. And it's a romance novel about vampires. I think I said that already. And it's kind of like a Brides of Dracula retelling. I sort of picked this up because I was looking for, like, vampire stuff and, like, a particular kind of vibe. And I had heard quite a lot about this because, like I said, it was pretty big when it came out. And I will say that the traditionally published, like, cover is just so gross in comparison with the original, like, cover, which I think is really cool and, like, an interesting kind of, like, ornamental cover in a way that the traditionally published one is, like, so soulless or whatever. But anyway, so yeah, I listened to this audiobook and I thought it was okay. I think people's standards for, like, the quality of romance writing tends to be quite low, which is why a lot of people said that this was, like, really beautifully written, and I thought it was well written, or at least I didn't think it was badly written. Yeah, there were definitely I think lots of people talked about this criticism of it, where it, like, the Dracula character, he's obviously, like, a red flag from the beginning, and, like, you're being told about his, like, badness and like abusive behavior and not really being shown it in a way, and so it feels kind of distanced in that sense. The way this novel is told is, like, it's from his first wife Costanza's perspective, but we know she's killed him like at the very beginning, and then she's kind of telling, like, his life / their life together to him as a kind of way to sort of absolve herself in a way, or, like, to kind of talk through it. There's a character who gets introduced near the very end of the book who I just thought was, like, very underdeveloped and sort of kind of silly as a sort of character to bring in then. I think he's called Alexei. And it does kind of zip through things, and I don't know, I thought it was fine, and it did have vampires in, which was what I was sort of in the mood for. And I did do a bunch of sewing whilst I was listening to it, so that was nice. The next book I read was Either Or by Ella Fatiman, which is the second book in the sort of, like, Idiot series. I'm not sure if that's what it's actually called, but, like, the Selin novels. The first book is The Idiot. Oh, where is it? Oh. This is the first one, The Idiot. And I really loved the first book a lot, so I thought I would really enjoy this, and I enjoyed it more than the first book. So this series is basically about Selin, who's, like, Turkish American, and she goes to Harvard, and the first book is her first year at Harvard, and she kind of is engaging a lot with, like, linguistic questions and trying to find, like, the truth of the world. And then she also she is really into Russian and, like, Russian literature and Russian language, and she develops this crush on this guy called Ivan, and it's kind of about that. And then the second book, you know, follows her into her second year, and, like, the developments of that. There's more, like, language stuff, although it is much less of a thread. There's a lot about sort of Turkish, well, I don't know if that's actually true, but there's, like, some interesting discussions and, like, comparisons of, like, Turkish identity in terms of thinking about it as, like, an imperial, as an imperial force in comparison with, like, Americanness too. It's so funny. Like, I mean, the first book was also really funny, but I just thought Selin was so fucking hilarious in this. And I just loved it. I don't know how to talk about it without kind of, I didn't want to, like, give it loads away, but in this one there's more kind of developments around, like, crushes and sex and novels. There's a lot of focus on novels in both of these books, but especially in this one. And also, like, philosophy. There's this kind of question that Selin is grappling with of, like, should you live an ethical life or an aesthetic life? And she uses Soren Kierkegaard's, like, work to kind of think about some of that. I just love this a lot, and part of it is also, like, having read The Idiot, I listened to this conversation between Merv Emre and Ella Fatiman about convenience store women, which I'll leave a link to. It's a really lovely conversation, and it's great in terms of thinking about novels and the politics of novels and the politicization of novels, or like how they can be like incubators of conservative thought, or yeah, heterosexuality, life, really interesting stuff, social reproduction. And listening to that conversation, I just kind of like loved like Aleph like so much, like so, you know, going into reading the second novel, I felt even more kind of inclined to like be tender about it and like love that. And then the way that like, because one of the stories that Aleph Batman tells about, talks about in terms of like people's response to the idiot in that podcast, is this person came up to her like at a party or something and was like talking to her about the idiot, and she was like really angry that Yvonne and Selin hadn't had sex. And the way like Aleph talked about that just also like me deeply endeared me to her. And I guess I'm always like interested by things that take sex both like seriously but also kind of like engage with it in like a strange way, engage with it in a kind of like uneasy but like I don't know, just like complicates this idea of like normative sexuality, I guess. And I do think that whilst I don't think these are like kind of explicitly going there, they're like gonna, you know, like you can tell. And like in the afterward, like in the notes of this book, there is a kind of shout out to compulsory heterosexuality, the Adrian Rich, yes, Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence by Adrian Rich from 1980, which like is sort of referenced as something that like was part of the thinking behind this novel, even if it's not like directly engaged within this novel, which I think you can really tell. There were a few times when I was reading it and I was like, compulsory heterosexuality, Selin? I think so. Yeah, I don't know, there's like this one particular scene that I thought was so funny and like so kind of like not tragic but also like very sweet, and like yeah, just really enjoyed this. Definitely let me know your thoughts. I also saw recently, because I when I finished reading this, I was like, oh, I wish there was a third year that I could read, like I wish that there was going to be. And I saw that somebody had said, like the author said that she's not going to write more in the series, but then one of my friends shared on Instagram that like there's going to be 2 more Selin novels. They're just like not going to be like campus novels in the way that these are, and take place maybe in 2017 or something, or like the first one maybe does. Yeah, that's exciting to me. So the next book I read was definitely less enjoyable, and I'm less enthusiastic about it. And that's Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I did read this really fast, so I wouldn't say that like my most kind of generous or attentive readings are particularly present, but it was a reread, and I reread it because I wanted to compare it with the film by Guillermo del Toro that just came out. And I did make a video about the film and the book. I guess it's kind of more focused on the film, but I brought the book in at points too, or like I was kind of trying to make like, I didn't want to be misstating like what was changed and what wasn't changed in comparison with the book and the film. I did kind of wonder if maybe if I reread it I would like it, because the last time I read it was in 2012 and I did not like it. But like that, it didn't change. It's just, you know, I have had experiences where like a book that I thought was like really boring, or like I just didn't enjoy when I read it first as a teenager, or like when I was just younger, that when I've reread it I've been like, whoa, this is actually incredible. Like I had that with Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is kind of crazy. I don't think I read the whole book when I was younger, but I remember reading parts of it and just being like, this is so boring. And then it's like, what was I thinking? But that's obviously fine. Like it's fine to have like a direct and, you know, different response to a book. And I think like our kind of understandings of the world and what we like value and think about and care about changes as you grow, and like that's fine. And so that's kind of also what's nice about rereading books, is they can surprise you like that. But Frankenstein didn't surprise me. Yeah, I won't go into it because I do feel like I spent a lot of time talking about Frankenstein. Sorry to all the Mary Shelley lovers out there. The next book I read was a really short book, and this is Olivia by Dorothy Strachey, which is about a girl who is 16 and goes to a French boarding school, like it's in Paris. And it's about sort of there are these like 2 kind of big figures within the school. There's Mademoiselle Julie and Mademoiselle Clara, I think was the other woman's name. It's a very short novel, so I sort of feel like I can't give it like loads of like stars or whatever, but I also felt like it was, for what it was really quite good, and I felt like it was very atmospheric and compelling. And I mean, it's definitely on the lesbian continuum, sometimes in a very explicit way. And yeah, gosh, I'm not being very like clear about this, sorry. Like I think Olivia's voice in this is one of the most kind of like vivid aspects, and I was thinking about why it's called Olivia as opposed to Julie, and I think that's partially because like it's trying to kind of make this point about like adolescent development, and like it was like really formative in Olivia's like life experience. And yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. I also decided to read this because I picked this up at the beginning of the year, and then when I read A Sunless Heart in October for Victober, it made me think about like lesbian school books like this one, and I was like, I haven't actually read these, or like I don't think I've read any of the like major ones, partially because I feel very uncomfortable with like adult student relationships, adult child relationships. Yeah, and like I don't think that these are like non-problematic representations of power and sexuality, but I also think that there's more to them than just the violence of those relationships, because of how they kind of explore women and girls growing up. And in this sense, like, it's Olivia as the protagonist, and also I don't like, you know, she's kind of part of this and she's also not, and that's also I think part of these narratives, or at least from this one, where like there is definitely a boundary that is crossed with these like adult and older women with these teenage girls. In the like, part of me wants to use the word parasocial for some of these relationships in a way, or they're almost triangulated, not in the sense that they're then kind of heterosexualized, although there is this one really interesting moment where Olivia tries to kind of imagine Julie as a man, and like how like she would then like kiss her and hold her or whatever, which I thought was like really interesting, kind of so telling, and like Olivia like stops herself from doing that. Yes, and there's also this idea of like love and what love is being explored in this novel, and I think in novels like these, I guess. And part of that I think obviously is because like lesbianism is seen as like monstrous, so it can't be loving, it's like toxic and noxious, which is, again, like I think that's something that is kind of being explored here, but at the same time, like there were also like models where that's not the case. There's this character called Laura. What I have dog-eared the page of is where Laura says like, there's nothing else, I just love her, and it's a very pure love. So like, you know, I don't know, I hope that was okay way to talk about it. The next thing I read was a graphic novel called Patience and Esther by S.W. Searle. And I read this because my friend Andrea Leanne recommended it to me, partially because we were having a conversation kind of about like representation, and specifically about like fat femmes, fat women in like romantic plots, and the difficulty in finding them, like fat representation. Yeah, so she recommended this to me because she had really liked it, and I did enjoy it. I feel like I have read quite a lot of romance things this month, but I guess I'm not really a romance reader, which is why none of them like I loved or anything. But this one was really nice. Like, I did like reading it. And I did enjoy also the kind of historical weightedness of the comic. It's set in the Edwardian era, and it's about these two maids basically who fall in love with each other. It's very sweet, and then because it's set in a particular time period, they also like engage with like suffragette stuff, but they also engage with it in a way that critiques the suffragettes, which I enjoyed. One of the protagonists is like British Indian from India, and her family is living there, and she's in the UK, and so there's some stuff sort of about that, and also just like her home sickness, that's the word, and also like her kind of trying to find and cultivate like sort of Anglo-Indian community where she lives. Yeah, it was cute, I enjoyed it, and like this is like a romance that has like sex and sex scenes in, which were sweet. Again, like I said, like because I'm not like a super romance reader, I didn't like love this, but I think it can find, like I hope that people can find it who will love it, because I think it is really nice, especially to be like seeing a visibly fat character being loved and cared for and considered desirable, and that's nice. Like, it's just nice to read that, because it's pretty tough out here for fat women, and it shouldn't be. Sorry, I mean, I feel like you can definitely tell I'm always like out of my element when I talk about romance books, but yeah. The next book I read, okay. The next book I read was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I finally decided to pick this up. It has kind of been on my like, I'm intrigued / I think I might get something out of this book list, but you know, I hadn't ever really felt like compelled to pick it up. Partially because like I read The Secret History and I did not like The Secret History, and people talk about If We Were Villains being very derivative of The Secret History, which it definitely is. But for me, I really enjoyed it a lot more than The Secret History. I think there is a way that it's maybe a little bit more simplified than The Secret History in terms of some of what it's sort of like. I feel like that one of the critiques, even though I felt like it was a very kind of ultimately empty one, but like one of the critiques in The Secret History is about like access to like class privilege, financial wealth and well-being, whereas in If We Were Villains, generally the characters are on the same kind of level playing field, or at least they're at a level where they're financially fine, and then like there are people who are like way above that, but it's sort of like there isn't this level of like struggling that like the main character in The Secret History, Richard, like experiences. I mean, like the main character that we learn about things through is called Oliver, and he does have some like money troubles, but I just felt like it was like not to the same degree, and it was also kind of like a quick switch from like being financially comfortable to not, in a way that is not Richard's experience, because that's consistent throughout his time at university, or at least like in The Secret History, you know. Like, okay, so the reason why I decided to like pick it up now is because I've been in, you know, a like Renaissance literature mood, like a Shakespeare mood, partially because of doing this teaching assistant stuff. I've been engaging a lot with it. It's also like early modern Britain, the Tudors, like that's my special interest, sorry. So I've been, and like Shakespeare kind of was one of my like first loves, and also was sort of like when I was younger I wanted to be like a historian, but Shakespeare kind of was the bridge, right, between like history and literature, and then obviously now like the work I do is like literary historical, so yeah. And so the reason why I was like, I'm gonna pick up If We Were Villains is because it's about a bunch of like Shakespeare trained like actors at university, and I heard that there was lots of kind of pretentious quoting of Shakespeare and blah blah blah, and I was like, okay, I think this is really like what I want to read right now. So that's why I picked it up. And yeah, the premise is like we start in a you know, like prison cell, and this police officer is like asking who actually did commit this murder, and Oliver, the main character, is like, okay, I will tell you what happened, but only when I get out of here, and only if there are no like repercussions. And the police officer is like, yes, please, I'm changing my like career to be a private like detective, or like a private security guy or whatever, so like I'm not gonna prosecute you, I just really want to know what happened, because he doesn't believe that it was Oliver who killed the person. And then we go back in time, and Oliver went to this like very prestigious and artsy like university where they have like, you know, like artistic strands, and he was in the like theatre strand, and they only do Shakespeare, and they like study Shakespeare in terms of like the historical context and etc. And then they also put on Shakespeare plays, and it's like so prestigious that like, you know, people get cut from the program every year, so if you're in your final year then you've really made it basically. And he is in his final year with like a particular cohort of people, and yeah, it's just about what happens and who was murdered. You can definitely figure out who's gonna get murdered, and then they do, and then you can also figure out, or like I'm pretty sure, I guess like basically right at the beginning like what had actually happened. But you know, I was kind of reading it more for like the Shakespeare vibes. There was one thing that they said which I found very annoying, which was about like the genre of the genre of like Julius Caesar, which is one of the plays that they're putting on in their final year, which of course is very like redolent with meaning about murder and betrayal, but like that's also kind of the fun of it. Like it's very like meta in that sense, like, you know. Yeah, okay, there was just one thing that they said about like genre that I was like, that's so silly, because genre is completely constructed anyway. I mean, not completely, but it's like the reason why we're like, this is a history play, this is a comedy play, this is a tragedy for Shakespeare is literally because of the first folio. Like that's how they presented it to us, as like an anthology. It doesn't actually have that much like technical or generic meaning. The idea that they're like really distinct categories is not accurate, especially because like a lot of the comedy plays, some of them question the boundaries of whether they're a comedy play. I recently watched Measure for Measure, and like, is that a comedy or is that a tragedy? So that really annoyed me. But aside from that, I really enjoyed it. I did kind of want them to just like talk more about Shakespeare and like talk more about like the history because I am a dog. But yeah, I ultimately really enjoyed it. Yeah, so like I wouldn't say this is a particularly good novel, but I also did really enjoy reading it. It was kind of the perfect thing to read at this time. If you are looking for something that's like kind of like nerdy and obsessed with Shakespeare, like it's kind of fun. Like, you know, you have to get into it. Like it's, you know, it's about plays, it's about theatre, so it is, and then it's about like actors within that, so it's you know, it's fun and kind of like over the top, but I also still felt like people were very like real characters. Yeah, and some of the kind of performances that they talk about doing and participating in sounded really fun and exciting, and like I did really enjoy that aspect too. Okay, I think I've just got two more things to talk about. So the first one is The Restless Republic, Britain Without a Crown by Anna Kay, I think is how you pronounce her name, which I will say I read enough of to kind of consider it read, but I didn't read like the whole thing from beginning to end. I read probably like 75%, and I was reading this kind of for like background. I also felt, again, this was like an interesting thing to read at this time when I'm in this teaching assistant stuff. Like for this week that I'm filming this, it's the Milton lecture, so he was writing and inspired by things that happened during the interregnum period, which is what the book is about. You know, yeah, we looked at the work of Hester Poulter, this really, really fascinating poet, who I was, I guess, maybe going to talk about, but I think I'll maybe make a video separate and talk about some of the like Renaissance stuff that I've been looking at. But she was writing in the 1640s and 50s and stuff, so again, like it felt like interesting context to kind of bring in and read at the same time as these things. It's just because I'm a nerd, it wasn't really for the teaching aspect, but I have kind of been wanting to check this book out for a while, so I also was like, it's a great time to do that. So yeah, like it was interesting. The reason why I didn't finish all of it is because I did just kind of get bored. I also kind of wanted there to be more women involved in it. There are like two key women figures and then a final woman who kind of shows up near the end, but I wasn't that interested in her. But the two women that I talked about, Anna Trapnell and, I don't know, was she called Margaret? Like Countess of Derby or something. She was like in the Isle of Man. She was a royalist woman, but she was very interesting. Yeah, like I thought it gave an interesting insight into this particular period of time, which of course is quite fascinating because for the people who were living during that time, like when the king was beheaded, so this is like after the British Civil War, in the 1640s. So in 1649, Charles I was beheaded. And then it's kind of like, what do you do now? There was a lot of just kind of like free-falling, trying to figure out, and the army was such like a big part of the Civil War, of course, but then also these kind of like political, infrastructural, governmental like creations, that also became a problem because the army is an army and can use force if they don't like what you're doing. And also the army was full of really radical people, including like levelers and like fifth monarchists at some point. And I mean, Quakers, I don't remember when Quakers stopped being part of the New Model Army, but Quakers originally were not pacifists. They became pacifists because they were heavily persecuted because they weren't involved in radical politics, partially through like army stuff. But I don't remember the dates around that, but that's not included in this book. Yeah, my point is that like the people who were living during this time, the 10 years or so after the death of Charles I, like they didn't know it was going to end by Charles II coming back, like, or at least they didn't know until maybe the final year where it became clear that that was the only political settlement that could really work, at least with the like particular people who were in power at the time. And with the death of Cromwell. So that's really interesting, right? Like imagine like the king is just beheaded and then you're like, well, what's next? And so that's partially why there was like a burgeoning of like scientific stuff. So one of the people that is talked about in this book, there's like 9 or so people I think talked about. One of them was like William Petty, who was this like scientific medical man and yeah, was kind of pushing the boundaries around like scientific knowledge. There's those 2 women, one of whom is Anna Trapnell, who was a fifth monarchist who had these like prophecies and was considered like a kind of interesting mouthpiece in terms of being both, first of all, pro like Cromwell and parliamentarians and things like that, but then ultimately turning against that because they kind of betrayed some of their principles. I think one of the interesting things also is that like the level of religious freedom just like completely exploded during the interregnum period. And although like it's not an uncomplicated or like actually completely free time span for like religious people and religious minorities, it was pretty unprecedented for the time. And so that's really fascinating also. But then it does all get re-shut back down into the box when Charles II comes back. But yeah, so it was like an interesting book. I think if you're looking for a book about this particular time in history, then it's worth checking it out. I think it's written coherently, like there's nothing I had particular issue with. Yeah, and there's like some stuff about Jared Winstanley, who's a digger, and I love the diggers. If you're like a leftist, you probably know the Billy Bragg. What's it actually called? The World Turned Upside Down, I think, which is like in 1649 at St. George's Hill. A ragged band they called the diggers came to show the people's will. They defied the landlords, they defied the lords. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the lands in common and to make the wastelands grow. We were divided. Okay. I did pretty well with that. Yeah, so if you know that song, that's about the diggers. Yeah, and then the final thing that I read is this. Patchwork, a graphic biography of Jane Austen by Kate Evans, which is actually a book that I asked Vasto Books to send me, and they did. So that was very nice of them. And it's a really beautiful book. I just like honestly saw this and I fell in love, and that's why I asked for it. Good picture to show. So it's obviously the 250th like anniversary of the birth of Jane Austen this year. Is that how maths works? 1775. Yeah, that's right, 250. And so obviously lots of things about Jane Austen have been like coming out over the years. So this came out in October, and yeah, so I found out about it like last month, and then I asked for it, and then I basically immediately read it. I think it's a really fabulous biography because of how it contextualizes Jane Austen's life in a way that I think often gets kind of underplayed, partially because people love to kind of engage with her work in a quite like fantastical and romantic register, and that's kind of ruined, or at least certainly what's the word where you're like compromised deeply by the, you know, interactions with and kind of like the meaning making that comes from the fact that like these people, especially these like rich people in her novels, they were making their money off the slave trade and off the exploitation of like Indian workers, and you know, just from the East India Company in general. And basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think people want to decontextualize Jane Austen or only engage with the context of Jane Austen in a way that like it completely erases and ignores the fact that she was alive at a time when the slave trade was literally happening, when colonial expansion and imperial projects was also happening, and Britain was getting wealthier and wealthier from the exploitation of workers in India and the kind of creation of textiles and these like trades of just like global exploitation, yeah, and like deeply unethical practices and approaches to people, deeply racist, ultimately. And yeah, I think that's really good and important to do in terms of like telling a biography. I thought it was really beautifully like illustrated, graphic. There's a lot of text on the page generally, so it is quite like a dense book, I would say, but I think that's really good. And there's also notes, which I also think is really good and really vital, because it is kind of like a fictionalized story, but then you can go and check the notes and you can be like, what was different about this like representation of the story that happened here? And you know, like some of that is just that like she dramatizes like conversations that happened in letters as if they happened in real life. There are like other significant changes, but yeah, I'm gonna record a video where I talk about this in depth, so I will stop talking now, but hopefully you will check that video out if you're interested in hearing more about it, because I do think it's a really like great and kind of like critical as well as like compassionate and like tender kind of exploration of Jane Austen's life. And yeah, I'd really recommend it to like anyone interested in Jane Austen, and then also anyone interested in this particular history, and also specifically like if you are interested in textile production, it's really great for that. Like it's very mindful about textiles being used as part of the illustrative kind of process, and yeah, I think this is one of the most beautiful pages. So yeah, I think that's everything I had to say. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. I hope you're having a good day when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!